I'm a flight attendant, and I've had some scary experiences during my career. There was one flight in particular. It was about 3 years ago, but the memory still sends shivers down my spine. Back then, I was still pretty fresh at the job, and this terrifying experience happened during a flight from my home base to Narita, Japan. As a flight attendant, you quickly learn that your airline has specific hotels or resorts for crew members to stay in each country you visit. The traditional hotel in Narita was infamous among crew for being a hotspot for strange activity. They whispered about weird vibes and strange occurrences, but I never brought into supernatural stuff. That is, until that night. After we cleared immigration in Japan, I was eager to go to my room and crash. I went through the usual routine of checking my room for any unwanted surprises, knocked on the door before entering, used my luggage as a doorstop, and meticulously inspected the bathroom and closet. I learned the hard way that you can't be too careful with these things, especially after a fellow crew member had a terrifying encounter with a hidden intruder. Once satisfied, I closed the door, placing my luggage on the spare bed beside mine. I never bothered to arrange my shoes neatly at the doorway. It's a tradition not to place your footwear together. I indulged in a long, relaxing shower, followed by my skincare routine. To avoid stumbling in the dark if I needed to use the bathroom, I left both the toilet and bedside lamps on. But as I lay in bed, sleep remained elusive. It was weird, because usually after a long flight, I'd be out like a light. That night, however, an uneasy feeling settled in. As I drifted in and out of sleep, I swear, I heard the sound of marbles rolling in the room above mine. It sent chills down my spine, but the night passed, and I woke up unharmed. The following morning, as I was getting ready at 6 a.m., the phone rang. It was odd, since I didn't have any close crew members on this flight who would call me in the morning. Typically, hotels wouldn't make wake-up calls unless you specifically requested one. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. A child's laughter greeted me. Creepy, right? I hesitated, but I didn't hang up. "Hello?" I said. The child, or whoever it was, started singing the ABC song. But the eeriness of it all had caught up with me. I realized it might be a prank, and I hung up. Later, as I was heading to the airport with my fellow crew members, we received an emergency call for a meeting. An overbooked flight had left over 100 passengers stranded in Narita Airport. We were called in to operate an impromptu flight. There were only 7 of us, including our in-flight supervisor, who had to join in the duty. Instead of cursing my luck at this overbooked flight drama, I couldn't help but dread the return to that creepy Narita hotel. But I kept my mouth shut, focused on my duties, and I didn't complain. The flight was surprisingly peaceful. No special meals to serve, as the passengers had booked last minute. Most just requested drinks and snacks, and there were no unreasonable passengers or messy toilets. The passengers were too tired to do much except sleep their way to Nagoya. Before landing, one of my fellow crew members, Sarah, started a conversation with me. We talked about our flights, the countries we'd visited, and what we did during our layovers. It struck me as odd, since I wasn't really close to anyone on this flight. But halfway through our conversation, she casually asked, "Did you feel anything weird about the hotel last night?" That's when I realized I wasn't the only one with that unsettling feeling. I shared my experiences of that eerie night, the marbles, and the strange phone call. Sarah was concerned. She even offered to let me stay in her room, but I declined, not wanting to inconvenience her. I still barely knew her. Our in-flight supervisor, Martha, then instructed us to perform our rounds, making sure passenger seatbelts were fastened, bags were properly stowed, and overhead compartments were secured. After the flight, we returned to the hotel, and coincidentally, I was assigned the same room. I went about my usual routine, and in the evening, I decided to do some souvenir shopping to distract myself from my streak of bad luck. I wasn't very familiar with Japan's metro system, or the location of its infamous shopping malls and shrines, so I did a lot of aimless walking. By the time I returned to my room, I was so tired, and the shopping bags felt like 10-pound dumbbells. All I wanted to do was to take a long hot bath and an early bedtime. I couldn't remember if I left the Do Not Disturb light on, but after just 10 minutes in the bath, there was a knock on my door. "Room service," a lady with a thick Japanese accent called out. I cursed myself for not flipping the switch on, but I didn't want to be rude to the polite Japanese staff. I rushed into a bathrobe, towel wrapping my wet hair, and I answered the door. To my shock, the elderly lady was already changing my sheets. How did she enter my room? I stammered, "How did you get in?" In her accent she replied, "Ma'am, you opened door for me. Then I will come in to clean, and you went back to shower." Confusion swirled inside of me as I tried to understand how this could happen. Then the lady paused, looking at me for a moment. "Wait, how did you get in?" I asked. She said in her accent, "Ma'am, you opened door for me. Then I will come in to clean, and you went back to shower." I was so confused, but this is what did it for me because I started breaking down right in front of this cleaning lady. She looked a bit shocked, but she was very concerned, even though she couldn't understand what I was saying. She told me to not stay in corner rooms the next time, and helped me pack all my belongings as I headed to bunk with Sarah. I was obviously embarrassed enough that I cried in front of this poor old confused lady, and had her pack all my stuff for me. If you're a fellow crew member, or a tourist who's heading down to Narita, Japan on your own next time, be very careful about what you do. If you realize that your assigned hotel room is in the corner room, change the room immediately. Another incident that happened to me was during a flight from my home base to Indonesia. This flight was one of the last few flights that I had to be on before my probation period was over. To secure your probation, your life really depended on your performance, especially if there were in-flight supervisors around. Before a flight, the crew members are given a list as to which passengers in their row were seated and what meals and beverages they've pre-ordered online. I had a few empty seats in my row, but I just wanted to bring your attention to seat 17E. It was not booked for sure, but people in economy class usually like swapping seats around and making themselves comfortable, but they usually do this after a meal is served. This is because we know where they sit and can serve them their meals. It was quite creepy though. The steward usually does a clicker head count before taking off, so we know the exact number of passengers to account for. We took off. The seatbelt sign was on and meal service came around. The seat at 17E was occupied by a young lady. Her hair was a soft brown. Her eyes were hollow, as if she were staring intently at something, and she never seemed to shift even the slightest bit throughout the entire flight. When I pushed the meal cart to her aisle and saw that she had no pre-booked meal, I asked her, "Ma'am, any snacks or drinks for you?" There was no reply. Well, it seemed pretty normal to me, since people who didn't want to spend money on flight meals or were just plain rude would treat us like that. I was back in the galley, and my supervisor assigned me to clean the washroom of the economy class. The protocol before going in to clean is that you would have to knock and see if there was anyone inside. Sometimes they forget to lock the door, so this is what you should do before entering. The space was pretty crammed, so I pulled the door open and I stood at the side. I jumped because what really shocked me was the girl from 17E. She was inside the bathroom, staring at her own reflection in the mirror so intensely, and she didn't even bother locking the door. "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm so sorry, but are you still using the washroom?" I apologized. She turned her head toward me in a sort of slow motion, kind of like an owl, smiled slightly, and exited the washroom. What the heck? That was really creepy. When I headed back to the galley after cleaning up the washroom, I heard some of my crew members speaking in a hushed tone. Basically, the passenger from 17E was standing in the middle of the aisles, sometimes staring at the passengers sleeping, and it really bothered them. There were about 3 passengers who complained to the other crew members, and my supervisor had to apologize and usher her back to her seat to no avail. It was only when the pilot announced that we would have to buckle up for landing that she slowly shuffled her way back to 17E. We thought the woman was slightly mentally unsound, so we did not bother her any further. Before exiting the aircraft, we were helping some of the passengers to reach the overhead compartment and unload their baggage. As I was passing by rows 16 through 20, I saw no sign of the lady who was supposed to be there. I headed back to the galley to verify with the steward who did the head count. The numbers were correct, so where did she go? Everybody else assumed that she headed back to her original seat, since 17E was supposed to be unoccupied, but I just couldn't get over it. A few of the other crew members and I were on standby at the entrance of the aircraft, thanking the passengers for flying with us. As each passenger passed me, I started getting distracted by looking around the aircraft to catch a sight of her. It didn't occur to me that I was so distracted until my supervisor came up to me during the clearing. It still came off to me somewhat creepy that each of us acknowledged her presence on board, but didn't know where she went after the flight. Was she flying business class, or did she not belong on the flight in the first place? It wasn't a long-haul flight, but I was really tired. I was ready to head to our accommodation and crash for the night. We were staying at a resort-style hotel, and I got the ground floor room. When you're new to the shop, you usually don't get that much say as to which room you want. Anyway, one of my other coworkers had worse luck than me. She got a corner room, and because the entire hotel was booked, she couldn't change rooms. I had her bunk with me since we were pretty much batchmates, and I didn't mind. I did my usual routine of knocking on the door 3 times before I entered, switched on all the lights, used my luggage as a door stopper as I checked the bathroom, behind the doors, and in the wardrobes. All clear. That was the good news. But right when we walked into the room, right in the middle of our vision was a huge glass door leading to the balcony. The curtains were open, so it gave us a full vision of the darkness beyond. It was just black. It creeped us both out, so we decided to close the curtains while we slept that night. Throughout the night, we could hear rattling sounds coming from outside, which I thought could be maybe construction activities in the forest. What an idiot I was. I ignored it, and I drifted back to sleep. Closer to the morning, maybe around 4 or 5 a.m., my coworker was already up. She was texting her family and boyfriend. We heard running and singing and screaming just right in the corridor. It sounded like there were children running and playing. At that point of time, it didn't really come across to us as weird or anything, since this hotel is pretty popular for tourists and families. We thought of it as a one-time thing we could live with a little noise. This is until this kept repeating with 5-minute intervals, and I was getting pretty annoyed. My coworker got up and she was ready to exit the room to tell the children off who were running about. But she came back after a split second, telling me there was nobody outside at all. Our room was literally situated in the middle of nowhere. The pool and garden was near us, but there was not a single soul in sight. My coworker wanted to bring this issue up with concierge, so that way we could sleep in peacefully. I reluctantly threw on my hotel slippers and shuffled out with her. The lady at the front desk went by the name of Susan. She was smiley and friendly. When we told her about the noise the children in the hotel were making, she kept apologizing profusely. When we told her our room number, she seemed quite shocked and muttered something under her breath. She immediately handed us some meal vouchers to one of the buffet restaurants in the hotel. It had international cuisine, and she also gave us new keys to new rooms and ushered us off. She told us to come back in 1 hour when our rooms were ready. She would get the room service to pack our stuff and then move everything into the new room, which was great hospitality, but I didn't know what triggered her reaction. and that obviously was kind of weird. I didn't want any answers either, out of fear, but my coworker was obviously having none of it. She was pulling every one of the hotel staff aside and demanding an answer. I mean, it is pretty weird that they decided not to let us back in our rooms, shifted us a floor up, and even offered us compensation without telling us the reason. We seemed like two crazy women trotting about the hotel mindlessly. I'm glad that nobody actually knows who we are and where we're from. We got our answer from a middle-aged Indonesian lady who was doing room service. I don't know much of Malay, but I was able to make up bits and pieces from her story. There were rumors that an incident took place outside the room we stayed in. Hence, the corridor and room were said to be quote-unquote haunted. She doesn't know exactly what happened, but in the earlier years there were much more violent encounters, which might have been reported in the papers. The hotel closed up the room until their renovations earlier, when they thought it would be safe to reopen this fully functioning room. Occupants have often reported hearing or seeing disturbing sights, which I'm glad we didn't see. That was why the hotel staff freaked out and immediately opened up another room for us despite claiming to be all booked out. She also warned us not to wander around that area, just in case anything dirty takes interest in us and follows us back home. Even though it scared me a little bit, I thought nothing of it. As long as you don't do anything to offend these spirits, I'm sure they wouldn't come bothering you either.